the WES Education Summit 2024. Our fellows from the Institute for Educational and Social Equity will be joining us for a panel discussion. And I'll introduce myself. I'm Dr. Kenisha Linton Williams. I'm one of the fellows at the Institute for Educational and Social Equity. I'm also an associate professor at the University of Greenwich, and my specialism is management and organizational behavior. So, in terms of this panel discussion, it's entitled Women in Education, Spotlighting Female Voices of Impact and Influence. So, from pioneering advancement in pedagogy to advocating for equal access to learning opportunities, these women have played instrumental roles in shaping educational landscapes globally. Their contributions extend beyond traditional teaching roles, encompassing leadership in educational institutions, some work in HR, policymaking, and research. Our panelists will share their insightful perspectives and invaluable contributions in the field of education. And I am going to introduce our panelists. We have two people missing, unfortunately, due to technical issues. So we're hoping that at some point they'll be able to join the discussion. So right now we have Dr. Deborah Outhwaite and we have Deeba Parmar. So I'm going to kick off the discussion until the others can join in. So, in terms of to start off the discussion, each panelist will introduce themselves, providing a brief background on their career in education and share any specific challenges they have faced as women in the field of education and how they have navigated these obstacles to achieve success. So I am going to start off with Deborah.
Thank you, Kenisha. Lovely to see you both. And let's hope our fellow panelists can come along any moment now. So hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to our panel. If you haven't met me before, my name's Dr. Deb Outhwaite. It's 30 years this year since I did my PGCE. And I suppose when I reflect on this question, you know, in terms of what you've learnt from your wider experiences, the reality is that we're all still learning, right? We're all still navigating certain spaces, and we choose through the academic work that we've done to give our agency to different people at different points in their career to help them along the way. So I'm, privileged in some ways. So I'm a social scientist. So I studied gender, race and class and what we'd refer to as stratification issues. I studied them at 18 and they became, part of my kind of inner psyche, I guess. But I thought that the world would change. And I thought the world would change quickly because we had a knowledge base and we could see that things like structural sexism and structural racism existed. And I expected them to disappear. And I guess 30 years later, having had the various barriers that I've had, I've worked part-time, I've had 3 children, I've navigated a particular route through to a role where I run a regional education charity. I do doctoral supervision. I'm a senior fellow at LSE. But the roles that we have change and shift all the time. And it's about how we choose to use that agency so that actually future generations that come through don't struggle as much. I remember looking at my mum, who was a science teacher, who did a degree later on in life, who did flexible working when it wasn't very, wasn't even known as flexible working at that point, and I thought, gosh, it won't look like that for me. And it's looked, as full of as many barriers. But the reality is other people have even more barriers than that, right? So it's about how we develop that sense of agency. And I think that's why I wanted to join you today. I think that's the great work that we do in the Institute for Education and Social Equity. We think about what those barriers are and how we can support other people to come through on their journey so that their journey is potentially less fraught. And we can talk about some of the ways we do that as we move forward today.
Thank you very much, Deb. Dr. Deeba Parmar.
Thank you. And firstly, as Deb said, it's wonderful to be with you this afternoon or this morning or evening, wherever you are in the world. It's wonderful to have this opportunity that we get to engage with you and hear from you as well as a part of this roundtable discussion in looking at influential and impactful females in the space of education. I personally come from a space of higher education, and I like to think of myself as quite new to higher education. But when I look at it, it's 22 years in, and I work at Middlesex University, so really situated in the UK higher education context. And there I have the role as head of the Centre for Academic Practice Enhancement. So looking at how we support academic colleagues and colleagues in the spaces of learning and teaching, so professional service colleagues as well, in order to support their own development for the changing context, the changing pedagogies and emerging issues such as, we will all be familiar with AI and how it has possibly changed and changing the learning and teaching landscape, but also to consider holistically how we support student learning and the student journey, as well as staff belonging to their institution, to their sector, to their discipline. So when I reflect on my own career journey, I think of it as relatively new, but there's been quite a lot achieved within that 20-year period, and I hope a lot more to come as well. I often, when I started in my early 20s, coming into higher education on the space of an academic staff member, I would be very keen and eager to attend as many conferences as possible. And there were quite sort of strategic conferences in looking at leadership, looking at student retention, issues around equality and diversity. And it would be quite evident to me that there were, maybe not a lot of females there, definitely not a lot of females of ethnic minorities. And if so, definitely not in the age bracket that I was in at that point in time. And all of these things seem to be really evident to me. And that notion of role modeling is exceptionally important, I think. If you think about the different spaces in which you engage in and what builds your identity, how does that role modeling look, and how do we as individuals contribute to that role modeling in different spaces? I think it's really interesting to think about our own spaces there. So personally, with that, throughout my career, I've engaged with as many networks and communities as possible. One, to also find a sense of belonging, but two, to be a voice of a female of color, and a member of a professional service. So I don't wear an academic hat, although I would very much put myself in the third space identity of clearly in learning and teaching, a doctor of education, which is my background, also from a social sciences perspective, but also to champion particular perspectives and viewpoints. Deb's mentioned about sort of the different stages of career and challenges and role models that we may have. I think of my own career, and I'm currently a single mum, which is a very important part of my identity. In fact, I mention it because it's important to see and hear others in similar situations that are managing. I think that's an end of a sentence, but managing to succeed and grow in spaces as well. And I think that's an important identity. Also at the stage of very young children. So there's a certain amount of balancing in terms of engaging in the networks that we do, providing that role modeling, but providing that voice that when we think about the different things we might be implementing in our own spheres, whether it's higher education, primary, secondary, other forms, charities, etc. How is what we are doing supporting different groups of colleagues, different groups of students? And they're all really important hats or identities that we wear as badges. So I think very much from that viewpoint that I'm coming from, in situated in higher education, in quite a strategic role, but also that of a female of colour and of a single parent, that thinking, how do all of these, how can I contribute and role model to others that there are many benefits to these different hats that I wear. I see at this point in time, I will hand over to you, Kenisha, because I see we have another panelist that's been able to join us.
Thank you very much, Deeba. Welcome, Sanchia. We're so happy that you
Hi,
managed to join us.
me too, me too. Great to be here. Great to be here.
So we've just kicked off with the opening question, which is basically to give us a bit of a background on yourself in terms of your career in education and share any
hmm
specific challenges that you've faced as a woman in the
hmm
field of education. We know you're specifically focusing around HR and policy.
hmm
So give us some background on you and tell us how you've navigated any obstacles in order to achieve success.
Thank you, Kenisha. So yeah, I've worked in the field of HR and higher education for the last 15 years. At the moment, I'm the head of equality, diversity, and inclusion at London South Bank University and based in their human resources department. And really, my role is about working to move organisations towards being truly inclusive, valuing their staff, and creating a culture where staff feel supported, appreciated, and respected. In terms of the challenges of being a woman in colour in higher education, I think there's so many sort of key issues that we as women have to face. First of all, there's an underrepresentation of women at the mid to senior levels of our universities. And then if you couple that with BME women, that picture is even worse. If you look at the number of vice chancellors that our UK universities have, which is, I guess, the top job, there are 132 universities in this country, and there are only 9 vice chancellors of BME heritage out of the 132. But a few years ago, that number would have been half. So we are making progress, but it's painfully slow. And we have seen a lot of, I guess, movement since the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020. But I think it's time for organisations to move beyond the statements and beyond the words and to have real, tangible, and meaningful action.
Thank you very much, Sanchia.
Thank you.
I'll just give a little answer for myself as well, since we're short one panelist. Um, so my background, I'm in higher education as well, and so I work with the Institute for Educational and Social Equity as a fellow and also as an associate professor at the University of Greenwich. And in terms of my career, I obviously, well, not obviously, but I started out as a lecturer and, well, even before that, as a PhD student, being a graduate teaching assistant, etc. And so I've had roles ranging from lecturer, program leader, senior lecturer, and now associate professor, and the some other small leadership roles within faculty level. And in terms of as a woman in academia, I think what I've noticed isn't necessarily pure gender bias, but a sort of intersection of gender and racial bias when it comes to unequal opportunities for advancement and or any stereotyping about my leadership capabilities. So that's kind of been my experience so far. Many years ago, I used to be very mellow and didn't notice any of these things. But the longer you stay in academia, the more your eyes open to how others have some opportunities. And then there are other groups that don't have the same opportunities. So I've sought out, to kind of create my own network, my own support network, and continue my own continuous professional development and advocate for myself in whatever ways I can. So um, I think I've done well, but I I try not to compare myself to people, because if I were to compare myself to people, then I'd say, oh, it's been unfair to me. But then again, it's about how I have faced those challenges and what I've done in order to, demonstrate my expertise, show my resilience and my dedication, and basically continue to overcome the challenges of being a woman, or a Black woman in academia. So that's my kind of opening. And we're going to open up to questions from the audience soon. I'm just going to kick off with one more question for the panel.
I think,
So,
Deeba, did you want to jump in on that point before we move on?
Thank you. Yes, please, if I can, because I think you've raised some really, collectively, some really important points in terms of opportunities and how equal they are for different areas. And earlier, Deb's mentioned about being active agents in change. And I would definitely look at my career and see where I have actively sought opportunities that are not primarily internal within my institution, but looking into the sector at a national level and international, that sometimes in really stepping out and welcoming other spheres. So it might be in the charity sector, it might be within a different sector that works with in terms of what you're doing, or in terms of the values that echo with you. Where can you contribute and belong to? So I think in not limiting our opportunities, we often think that opportunities don't come our way, possibly internally or in different avenues. And I think it's really about actively seeking and pushing forward in where you can contribute. Colleagues, as we've mentioned, the four of us here today are fellows of the Institute of Educational and Social Equity, and that is a really important institution in terms of championing voices, moving forward in supporting individuals, institutions, different groups and sectors in their social and educational equity. And I think that, for an example, is a way that we are role modeling, we are pushing areas forward that might not sit within our direct hats, but it's the roles that we take on and seek in order to champion females, different ethnic minorities, different marginalised groups in that role modelling, and to support educational and social equity. So I think we can probably move on to a question that you have, Kenisha.
okay, thank you very much, Deeba. I'm not seeing any questions from the audiences yet, so off to our second question. So I'm now thinking about positive female influences that we've had, and also connecting that question to, do you believe that female educators contribute uniquely to the educational landscape? So talk a little bit about that, and how have their voices been amplified and recognized? So who are your positive influences in terms of females in education? And, what unique contribution do you think women in general have in the educational landscape?
Do you
Deb,
want me
I'm going
to
to start with
yeah,
you
do you
again.
want me to
Yeah.
start again? That's absolutely fine. So I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think these are things that we stop and think about. And I think not everybody does. So I think the fact that we think it's an important question to ask shows that we think we make a significant contribution. But, you know, my background is in 11 to 18 teaching, and, you know, something like 85% of the school workforce is made up by women. And yet Schools Week published a bit of research a couple of weeks ago to show that our school trusts and the leaders, so the chief executive officers of multi-academy trusts, is running at about 30% for women at the moment. And so what we've not got is reflection of the levels that women are in any of those areas of education. So, you know, when somebody posted, for example, and we won't get into it, on Twitter a few weeks ago, we've all had enough equality now. I was thinking, really? We've had enough equality now, have we? Fascinating in terms of the way people perceive equality. We can all see that we have a dreadfully unequal, totally polarized, divided society. And that society plays out in lots of different ways. So in the education field that I'm in, that has some intersectionality with the voluntary sector and the third sector, you know, you can see that it's largely women, largely picking up roles that used to be much better funded as part of the welfare state. The welfare state's contracting, those roles are not existing anymore. So it's charities picking up that. And that's a really tricky thing to watch play out, because a lot of that stress then passes on to the women who are in those senior roles. And Kenisha, you talked about, you know, the role you found yourself in and trying not to compare to other people. But actually, what we haven't mentioned yet is the word fatigue. You know, people who have to do that, they try not to compare, they try to reach out, they try to develop better networks for themselves. If you haven't got a decent mentor, a decent coach, you're not surrounded by a decent set of allies, the fatigue that goes with being in that position is really tangible. And I regularly have people that I mentor or I coach in tears when I discuss this, because actually the weight that individuals carry because of the structural inequalities that we have in society is not good enough. And it's been polarized, you know, incredibly more through the last 14 years through policies like austerity that land disproportionately on women and disproportionately on people who come from global south communities. And they're really, you know, we need to acknowledge that, and we need to acknowledge that so the people who need to be reaching out to explain how the landscape works are, you know, white people like me reaching out to other white people about how that lands. Yeah, I was with a black female head just last week, and she's the only black head in her area of the country. And she went up to the meeting, have a network meeting, and somebody said, "Who are you?" And she said, "I very nearly said I'm the only black female head that was in the meeting last time when we met a term ago, and the term before that, and the term before that." And these people are in these positions, totally intolerable positions, again and again and again and again. And it's not good enough. We need change. So it is about thinking through what those different positions are, and thinking about impact, thinking about how fatigue, understanding fatigue, thinking about how that makes people feel and what we can do about it. And I think, I'm not sure if I've answered your question, Kenisha, really, but I think it's important that we think in a broad way about how that's not necessarily, you know, we can see privilege reproduces, you know, class reproduces. We can see that. We can see people in positions of power. You know, we know all about Bourdieu's reproduction and everything else. But actually, this is about how we reach out to help different people and change different people's trajectories, and what role we have in doing that. You know, and I do that in a range of different ways. So we recruit for initial teacher training, education, so PGCE routes. We often have people who apply to us who don't meet the criteria. And I have, you know, really great admin support. We reach out to those people and say, we can see it's your dream to become a teacher. Here are the things you need to do. We don't just reject them. we give them feedback. We say, if you want to come in and talk to us, or if you want us to organise you some work experience in one of our local schools, we can do that. Here are the qualifications that you're missing. Here are the statements that are good that you could put into your statement that means you're more likely to be accepted. But, you know, we're lucky that we have a bit of capacity to be able to do that. I think we're pretty unusual in the fact that we do that. So there are all sorts of ways in which, you know, professions can be changed if we create the space and the time in order to do that.
Thank you very much, Deb. Deeba, over to you. You're on mute, Deeba. Oh dear.
Apologies, that was very sort of COVID times of me to not take myself off mute. I think you'll have to remind me of the question. I'm afraid, Kenisha. I can see we've got a couple of other questions that have come through, and answers are kind of
Yes. So yeah, I'm going to
merging
move to
together. And actually, considering time as well, and I think, you know, what I would probably draws upon some of the questions that are coming through, in terms of, we have some questions coming through about females supporting females, women supporting women, and talking from a personal perspective, and then how I try to foster that culture as well. I am very fortunate to have a number of close, supportive females in the sector, but I would say that that has been through me actively seeking people as well. And this might be people that I've worked with in one capacity or another in a range of different projects, possibly within my institutional work I do across the sector, but actively seeking people. And I have been known to tap people on the shoulder at different events and say, you know, I have been wishing to meet you. Will you mentor me? Will you support me? Obviously not couching it as bluntly as that, but, you know, actively seeking people that I admire for whatever reasons, and to seek support from them. Because I think that, as Deb's mentioned, having mentors yourself in whatever space of your career that you may be in is really, really important. And actually, that was something that wasn't handed to me or given to me, and I didn't see to be within my institution. I'm sort of reflecting on coming back from a maternity leave and actually thinking, I want some support, I want some mentoring, and I'd like it to be in the space of a senior female leader, or a senior female leader of ethnic minority, and it wasn't possible. So I thought, okay, well, I will seek my own within the sector. I will seek that, and that's something that's always within my mind. But also giving back. You know, people wish to be mentored or to seek the support, and I think that's really important, because not only is it a case that obviously you gain from having a mentor, you gain so much from being a mentor as well. And in terms of spaces in which women support one another, there have been spaces that are clearly out there in the sector that cross sectors in terms of higher education, school education, charities. There are networks and communities that support one another. So in terms of identifying what works for you and the communities and the principles that align for you, I would definitely recommend that that's something that people seek and look into. But from an institutional perspective, within my own institution, it seemed to be a space that was missing of not having a women's network and not having that those voices that are showcased and spotlighted beyond notional sort of, it's wonderful to have in International Women's Day, but how is that lived? How is that breathed? How is that felt in terms of women supporting women? And I think that, you know, we can all agree that not everyone will support one another, and sometimes situations are almost pitted against, so that females are pitted against one another, which is a case of really looking at the culture of the place, the culture of the institution, the policies, the procedures that support that. But having some very basic structures in women's networks internally And if they're not there, creating them yourselves. It's not to say that it needs to sit in an academic field or a HR field, or creating those networks that you don't see, that you know are going to be beneficial, is really important.
Thank you very much, Deeba. Sanchia, do you want to speak to the question regarding positive female influences, or just generally about female educators' contribution to the landscape? Or as Deeba has done, which is to pick up on Francesca's question, which is talking about women supporting each other. So they're kind of connected, those three. Sanchia, which one do you want? I think Sanchia is frozen.
Yeah, I think she's gone now,
Okay.
so we know she was frozen.
Okay, so while we wait for Sanchia to come back in.
I'll hop back in again, because I think you can see the overlap. So thank you, Francesca and Jessica, for your questions. I think, again, I've had some not very helpful contributions over the years, but I've had some really helpful contributions over the years. So I think it is about, finding people think, oh, I've asked somebody to mentor me, so I'm going to stick this out. If you're not getting anything out of it, don't feel the need to stick it out. It's important that you feel very comfortable with the person who's mentoring you in a particular role. And I think mentoring and coaching often get conflated. They're not the same thing. It's fine to reach out. Deepa's told us about tapping people on the shoulder, and sort of talking to people. And I think that's fine. That's a good way to connect with people. You need to connect to people who you feel you've got a lot in common with. Don't wait till you're part of some organised scheme perhaps that's finding somebody for you. That's not necessarily the right way forward. I mean, some people are in schemes that are of course very helpful, so again it just depends on what works. But I think that's probably what you mean, Francesca, by sometimes it can be negative. And I think I absolutely agree with Deeba. You get a tremendous amount from mentoring, but I am consciously now really only mentoring women of colour, because I think that's where our real system issue is. And I think I have a kind of moral duty to do that. And it's, they need to come on to find people who are better role models for them than I am, right? So as more people come through the system, that won't be the sort of people I'm mentoring. But that's what I'm doing at the moment. So the three mentees I have at the moment happen to all be women of colour, but not happen. That's a deliberate kind of active choice on my part. Jessica, yes, we all agree that the education landscape is not a place that welcomes women with open arms. It does welcome women with open arms to do the dross roles and to pick everything else up. And I thought it was interesting, Kenisha, when you were saying you'd had some minor faculty leadership roles. I thought, isn't that interesting, just in terms of the way we're kind of conditioned almost to express how we introduce ourselves, and there are lots of pros and cons in this. We can see that people are given little things. Oh, we're just giving you this just to see what it's like. In schools, it used to be called distributed leadership. We'll just give you this. It's a promotion, but we're not going to call it that because we don't want to give you any extra money for it. It'll look good on your CV later on. Yeah, so they're happy to throw stuff out. But actually, when we start saying, well, we want a seat at the table and we haven't got one, so we'll pull up our own chair, they're perhaps not as happy when we're there. So I think this was really interesting. So we don't necessarily see women supporting and championing each other, but sometimes we do. So in the school space, you clearly haven't. I have seen some great female heads reaching out and supporting the next generation of women teachers and supporting people in their own generations too. People come to careers at very different points in their lives, and I've trained over the years a lot of mature students who are career changers who bring with them a wealth of experience from other areas. And I've really encouraged them to go for leadership posts quite quickly because there's no reason why they wouldn't. They bring all that outside experience. And again, education's not very good at dealing dealing with that either. I think it's a culture of time serving that goes on, which is, outdated and old hat, really. So how can we work to build that culture of acceptance and inclusivity from all teachers, from schools up to faculty and universities? I think this is about us pulling seats up to the table often when we're not necessarily wanted there. It's about pointing out that representation is not good enough and representation needs to change. And I think you're right, Deeba. We have had some progress, but it's not fast enough, and it's not anywhere near fast enough. So I've reached out to different organisations. Obviously we're here for Institute of Education and Social Equity, but I'm going to give a shout out for Women Ed. At Women Ed, at BAME Ed, if you haven't come across them, on Twitter, at Diverse Educators. They're all organisations who are reaching out to try and make sure that we change how our schools look. And when we change how our schools look, slowly our universities will change as a consequence. Okay. So there is an organisation in universities, it's called WHEN, so Women in Higher Education Networks. There is some change happening. For me, I think it depends on which route you want. So Deeba can talk a bit more about this because her route is different to mine. If you want that academic route, we have some female profs now who you can reach out to and are, role modelling what people like me would like to see. We have that in headship as well. We just don't have it at the rate yet that we would like. There is some cultural change, but it's not, as I said earlier, going all the way through. So it's not going to trust CEO level. And that is a worry because it means our culture is not really changing. It means the men have just pushed the barriers up a level. And remember, and I say this most times, I end up saying this when I talk, women's careers are not like men's. Men's careers are ladders. Women's careers very often are like playing hopscotch. Okay, so it's fine to do something that looks like it might be taking you out, because when you come back in with all that experience. And often people will say to me, well, I can't do that because, it doesn't take me straight up to the next rung. And I think, well, yeah, but you might actually skip a rung or two if you come back in with that level of experience. So there is a bit of a sort of thinking about things a bit more laterally than we do. And again, schools are not good at doing that.
Thank you very much, Deb. Deeba, did you want to touch on Jessica's question? So I'm going to read it out just for the sake of those who are going to rewatch the video and may not have seen the chat. So Francesca's question was, what is the panel's experience with other women supporting each other? At times it can be negative. Comment, please. Thank you. And then Jessica's question is, I think we all agree that the education landscape is not a place that welcome women with open arms. However, one does see women supporting, welcoming, and championing each other, especially on a school space. How can one work to build that culture of acceptance and inclusivity for all teachers from schools up to faculty and universities? So Deeba, jump on any one of those. We're going to be wrapping up soon.
I know that we're wrapping up shortly, and so many really important points have been made. And I absolutely love the term of hopscotch, Debs, because I think that is really interesting to know. Reflecting on my own career, I can see I have, another 20, 25 years next still to go. And where do I want to go? And how do I support those that are within my sphere and those coming up that can, I might be inspirational for, but also where do I seek that inspiration? And I think in thinking about how that is embedded within the place you are. So if it's your institution, if it's your school, how is inclusion and active engagement by particular groups felt? So I'm talking about, what do your policies actually look like? But then how are they translated into the culture? Do they feel like tick boxes, or are they felt more authentically? For example, are your spaces of development in periods of time where people that, and it's quite often women, not always, but undertaking childcare roles, etc., can't attend or engage. How are you ensuring that people can engage in a variety of different ways? So I think often places have uh, policies, procedures, frameworks that look really good, but in actual fact, how are they felt to those that they're most impactful for is really worth seeking out and finding. I think the other thing that, particularly for my own career, has been really important, that if I haven't found it easily, and there is a lot that's out there that you can find, I will create it. I will do my best to work with others to create something that I can't find. We've just talked about different routes to elements, and in terms of professorship, in my own institution, there are a number of female professors, which is inspirational. There's not many. There are no actual professors within a third space role or professional service role. I'm clearly within the area of learning and teaching. There is no route there. So in terms of inspiration for myself, that will be something that I have to work on and I have to champion and create. And I will look to seek of how that's undertaken in the sector. So I think it's that forward facing elements that you can help create dynamic change and help feedback within your own place. So that feeling and sense of belonging is felt by others. And if it's not there, how can you help to contribute to create it?
And I
Thank you
think
very
I'd
much,
go
Deeba.
one step more than that, actually, because if Jessica hasn't found that, if she's not seeing that, she says, especially she does not see women supporting, especially in a school space, I would say move, move, change jobs, go somewhere else. We're at a point where we have a recruitment and a retention crisis in schools. And frankly, that has to make the people who do the recruitment think about who they want and what type of culture they want and what type of ways they're going to accommodate that. So that, it's not great that we have a recruitment and retention crisis, but actually having that can be very useful to make sure that people use that shake up to get what they want out of the system. And I don't mean it to sound individualistic in that sense, but actually in order to change cultures, we need to create institutions where they can say, in our setting, we have changed this culture. Look at what culture we have here, and role model and show that it can be done. I know lots of schools, for example, who've moved from having 10-day timetables, which were dreadful, like we had when my children were tiny, could not get could not get childcare at all. But as time goes on and you have 5 more schools embracing 5-day timetables, problems like that start to dissipate. So we will get some cultural change from things like that.
Thank you very much, Deb. So just to chime in on that, we're going to have to do a hard stop at 1:45 because of technical issues with the session after this. So in terms of thinking about women supporting women, I must say that the most support I've felt have been from Black women. I have some really good female colleagues who, I guess, because we have that social identity as Black women and they understand. So these are professors who are ahead of me. And it's almost like they've taken me under their wings, saying, this is what you're going to experience, Kenisha. This is how, just come to us for support, our shoulder to just lean on. And so sometimes they don't have the power to give you access or to do things for you or sponsor you, so to say. But they've been really supportive and have been insightful in terms of sharing what their experiences have been and saying, oh, yes, you're ready for this, go for that, do this, do that. And just being that reassurance and inspiration, because seeing them go through it ahead of me gives me the kind of hope that, you know what, it may be challenging, but if they can do it, I can do it too. So I've had persons who have supported me, men and women, but it's nice to have Black women because it's a different kind of nook that you just feel really safe And when they speak to you, they speak very frankly about everything they've experienced, and it resonates in a very different way. So I'm really glad that we have that openness where they're able to be honest with me and talk the way they do. So it prepares me, and I think that's important. So on that note, there are no other questions in the chat, or maybe it hasn't been shared by the producers because we're running out of time now. So I want to thank our panelists for a very insightful discussion, a conversation that could continue actually for another 20 minutes at least. And we would love to, because we do have some other questions that I had prepared, but we just don't have time to delve into those questions right now. So thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Deeba, for your time and for sharing so much about your experiences and just starting off this dialogue. And I hope it will continue maybe next time. So, all the best, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Very welcome. Nice to
Thank
see
you
you both.
all.
Bye.